Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, August 4th, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you on the future of artificial intelligence and the path toward AGI, artificial general intelligence, which may not be the path that is most commonly being pursued today. But before we get into our introductions and our special guest for today, I would just like to note that unfortunately a great scientist, a great mind died recently on August 1st, 2024, Leonard Hayflick, the discoverer of the Hayflick limit, the limit to how many times most cells within the human organism can divide. He was 96 years old, so that is a longer lifespan than most people today attain, but we still lost a great mind, and this is another testament to the ravages of aging and how much death takes away from humanity. So we need to defeat aging and we need to defeat death so that we don't lose more people like Leonard Hayflick. All right, so joining us today is our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, members, advisors, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our biotechnology advisor and founder and CEO of Sierra Sciences, Dr. Bill Andrews, our member and friend David Wood, who is the founder of London Futurists, and he is the executive director of LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and also our foreign ambassador in Spain and technology advisor, Dr. Jose Cordero. He is co-author with David Wood of The Death of Death, which is an outcome we all seek to attain. And our special guest for today is Peter Voss. Peter Voss is an innovator, serial entrepreneur, CEO, engineer, and scientist. He is the founder of AIGo.ai, whose mission is to bring AGI, artificial general intelligence, to the world to boost human flourishing. And he has the distinction of being one of three people who coined the term artificial general intelligence, along with Ben Goertzel and Shane Legg. So that is indeed quite a pioneering type of concept that we will be discussing today, and Peter is just the right person to discuss it with us. And actually, Peter and I have known one another for a long time. Back in 2014, more than 10 years ago, Peter was one of the people who helped crowdfund the distribution of my illustrated children's book, Death is Wrong, to over 1,000 people, 1,000 children throughout the world. And that was, I would say, a milestone in life extension advocacy that Peter helped to make possible. And then in 2017 at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, I participated in a panel with Peter where we shared our insights on the impacts of AI and robots and automation on the future of the market economy and whether the market economy would be able to continue in a world of rapid automation and deployment of artificial intelligence. So I would encourage you to watch that panel as well. It is linked in the description of the YouTube video. And now, Peter, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And please, you have the floor. Tell us about your work in approaching true AGI.
Yes, thank you. So I've been on this mission for the last 20 plus years, 25 years or so. And current company, igo.ai, that is our mission. In fact, a few months ago, we actually decided to put our commercial side of the business on hold so that we could focus 100% on actually getting to the to human level AGI. But I'll talk more about that because we found that it was really running a commercial business just ended up being too much of a distraction. Um, but let me give a little bit of context, a little bit of background on how I got to working on AGI. I originally, my career started really as an electronics engineer. I started my own electronics company eventually. Then I fell in love with software, and my company turned into a software company. I developed an ERP software package, a suite of software. Um, for small to medium-sized businesses, and that business turned out to be quite successful. We went from the garage to 400 people and did an IPO. Now, the reason I'm talking about that is that really put me in a position to tackle this big idea because when I left the company, it was, well, what do I want to work on now? What big challenge do I want to tackle? And how can we get software to have common sense? How can we get software to learn? Because software is pretty dumb. If you don't think of something, it'll crash or give you an error message. So how can we overcome that? How can we have software that can have common sense and learn? And so I actually embarked on a 5-year journey to deeply understand intelligence from various aspects, from philosophy, epistemology, theory of knowledge. How do we know anything? How can we be certain of things? What is our relationship to reality? And things of that nature. Even um, things related to ethics. How do we know what's wrong and right? What is free will? What is consciousness? To really study these things in depth. I also studied cognitive psychology. What do IQ tests measure? How do children learn? How does our intelligence differ from animal intelligence, and so on? And then of course, I looked into what had already been done in the field of AI. Um, and it's a culmination of that I came up with a design for a thinking machine, essentially, and that I've been working on developing with a relatively small team over the last 20 plus years. Now, um, in 2001, when I started my first AI company to turn these ideas into various prototypes to basically experiment and develop prototypes, that's when I came across other people, Ben Goetzel and Shane Legg and a few others, um, who sort of came to the same conclusion at that time, who said that we want to get back to the original dream of AI. The term AI was coined 69 years ago, and when it was coined, they actually thought they could crack this within a few years, that they could actually get to human level AI, within a few years. Now, of course, it turned out to be much, much, much harder. So what happened, the field of AI over the decades really turned into the field of narrow AI. And that's a very important distinction because narrow AI is picking one particular problem that seems to require human intelligence um, and then writing a program to solve for a computer to solve that problem. So, whether that's container optimization or a classic example, of course, is Deep Blue, IBM's chess world champion. But the important distinction here is you're not actually building an intelligent machine. You're not building a machine that can figure out how to do these things. You're using external intelligence, using the intelligence of the programmer or nowadays the data scientist to figure out how to put together software that can solve that particular problem or set of problems. And that is actually still true even today with large language models and statistical systems. So the realization was for us to go back to the original dream of having general intelligence, having a machine that has human level intelligence that can think, learn, and reason the way humans do. is something we wanted to pursue, and we felt that technology had advanced sufficiently for us to get back to that original dream. So 2002, we coined the term AGI, artificial general intelligence, and wrote a book on the topic. So that's kind of the background of it, is um, having machines that can think, learn, and reason. And I need to unpack that a bit. Um, so let me give an overview of what I want. The points that I want to make here is there's quite a bit of misunderstanding today of what AGI actually means. And I actually just recently had the chance to talk to Anders Sandberg at a conference, and it was quite interesting to find out from him, and also Robin Hanson. I had a chance to have a fairly lengthy discussion with both of them, and how much of a misconception in my mind there actually is about AGI, what AGI entails. Um, and, and, and in fact, I realized that a few years ago, and my Facebook page on AGI is actually real AGI. So we kind of have to recalibrate what AGI is. So I'll obviously talk about what I mean by that and what it is. But the general idea is AGI will be the most valuable and beneficial technology ever. Now, secondly, we can have AGI soon, but not via large language models or statistical systems. So the path to small AGI to AGI is via small data and cognitive AI, much more the way humans learn and humans become intelligent. Well, that's obviously a pitch here from our company, but this is a general point I make. And in terms of it being the most transformative technologies, that's not that controversial anymore. But where I think there's a lot of misconception is that people tend to think of AGI being able to do that you have a lot of AGIs that can do different tasks, that you basically still have kind of a collection of narrow AIs or AIs that have been trained specifically to do one task at a time. And once you have that, you've achieved AGI. Now, I think that is quite wrong. You really want AGI really needs to be a system that can learn by itself, that can learn autonomously, uh, really to become anything, to become a programmer. So think of a smart college graduate who can now hit the books and become a cancer researcher, or an accountant or a lawyer, or whatever. That is really what AGI is, the ability to autonomously learn to do any of the skills that a human can. So let me share a little bit about the vision, and I typically put this into kind of three categories, so you can carve it up in different ways. Um, and the first category I won't spend a lot of time on, but that's basically just very dramatically reducing the cost of goods and services by automation, by radical automation. By definition, and a real AGI will be able to replace any cognitive desk job. So any desk job that's out there that is mainly cognitive, and I kind of keep the artistic side. We can have a debate on whether artistic side would be included there, but let's just say any cognitive task will be automatable with AGI, and that of course will bring a radical reduction in costs in goods and services, and the abundance that comes with that. But the second point here is really the one that for us is the most important, and that is to have AGI scientists. So imagine having one AGI that trains itself up to be a cancer researcher, to take a very sort of common scientific endeavor. So you have one AGI that's trained itself up to a PhD level cancer researcher. You can now take 1 million copies of that, and you can have 1 million PhD level cancer researchers chipping away at the problem, sharing sharing the information, and the amount of progress we'll be able to make will obviously be exponentially higher than what we can with humans. They'll have all the advantages of computers, that you know uh, they'll cost much less than humans. They'll be able to train themselves up much quicker than humans. They'll communicate much more effectively. You don't have egos getting in the way. They'll be able to copy knowledge that one has to another. Be able to be able to concentrate 24/7 and uh, work at a higher pace than humans. Um, in addition, they'll have photographic memory, instantaneous access to all the information of the internet, and they'll be much, much better at rational thinking, at logical thinking than we are. For us, logical thinking is really an evolutionary afterthought. We're not actually very good at that. So that is the promise of AGI in the scientific area. And of course, for us, keen on life extension or getting cryonics to actually work, that'll be a fundamental game changer. I mean, I think most of us have a pretty good idea of just how difficult anti-aging is, or to defeat aging. It's a really, really hard problem to solve, and the progress we're making is just really at a snail's pace. So being able to accelerate that dramatically will be tremendous. So the third category, and I'll just mention that briefly as well, that I am very excited about, is what I call a personal assistant. And the reason I use the word personal 3 times is, in if I have anything to do with it, and what I hope will happen with AGI, is that each person in the world will be able to have their own personal assistant. And first personal is that you own it. It serves your agenda, not some mega corporation's agenda. The second personal is hyper personalized to you. It will obviously learn about your history, your goals, what you're doing, people you interact with, and so on. And in addition to helping you with sort of the mundane stuff that you'd love to have a human personal assistant for, like dealing with your insurance company or the IRS, um, that it will also be able to just help you think things through. It will be like a little angel on your shoulder to help you make better decisions in life and to boost human flourishing. So those are like just 3 categories that I see that are, in my mind, by definition, enabled by AGI. So the next major point, of course, is that I don't believe that large language models or statistical systems will get us to AGI. And I used to be alone on this until fairly recently. But now we have, people as famous as Jan LeCun being quite vocal about it. He's saying, large language models are are an off ramp to AGI, a distraction, a dead end. Um, and even Demis Hassabis says that deep learning, machine learning will not get us to AGI, not by a long shot. Now, and of course we have Gary Marcus being very vocal about that as well. Now the interesting thing is none of these people actually have a clear path to AGI, and I think the reason for that is that their background, their thinking, their approach is so informed by big data and statistical learning and statistical approaches that they can't really think outside of that box. And they typically do not have any training in cognitive psychology. They're not starting from the premise of understanding what is special about human intelligence, what makes human intelligence special, what are the requirements of human-like intelligence. That's not the starting point. The starting point is, hey, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of compute. What can we do with that? And I think it's fundamentally the wrong approach. You need to start with understanding the problem you're trying to solve before you can have an implementation. So I think that's why there is this, they're kind of blindsided in that sense. Now, we could debate what these inherent limitations are, and I'm sure in the Q&A it'll come up. Um, but for now, I'll just say yes, that's not fixable. So we have Sam Altman saying he needs $7 trillion to build nuclear power stations and whatnot to basically get enough computing power to get to AGI. Uh, that's really quite absurd when you think that our brain uses 20 watts of power, and a child can learn to be competent in language and basic reasoning with probably 5 million or 10 million words being exposed to. So we really need to look for that approach that is much closer to human cognition, both in terms of understanding what's important to that in that, and in order to get the solution for it. So the approach that we've taken is basically a cognitive AI approach. And DARPA a few years ago came out with what they call the 3 waves of AI. And the first wave is basically good old-fashioned AI. So that's the 70s, 80s, 90s. The second wave, that's the tsunami that hit us about 12, 13 years ago, when people figured out how they could use massive amounts of data, massive amounts of compute to do really useful things, like massively improving speech recognition, translation, image recognition, and now with generative AI, doing these amazing things with summarization, idea generation, image generation, and so on. But the third wave is really about the critical aspects of intelligence, basically the ability to learn adaptively in real time, which is critical to be able to solve problems. So, how we learn as humans is we learn adaptively, conceptually. We form concepts that can then be reused in other areas. But also incredibly important that we learn incrementally in real time. We think about it. So think about a scientist, but this really applies to like a conversation we're about to have now in the Q&A. The way human intelligence works is we read a sentence or hear a sentence and we evaluate it. We evaluate it against our current model, against our current knowledge. Does it agree with something we know already? Does it disagree? Does it raise some new questions? Where does it lead? What does it make me think of? What questions do I need to ask? So we have this interactive integration of new knowledge that we get. And we do that conceptually. Once we see a pattern, we form an abstract concept of it. That's the key power of human intelligence, is the ability to form abstractions and to reason in abstract ways. Now, one other important aspect is that we have metacognition, or system 2 reasoning, not just the sort of predict the next word or automatically be an automatic pilot, but we have metacognition where we can think about our thinking and redirect our thought processes in different ways. So those are essential components of human intelligence, requirements of human intelligence. So if the blue dot represents human intelligence, generative AI is just missing the mark. And if you're trying to go north, but you're heading in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it and how much resources, you're not going to get there. Generative AI is off the charts as far as the amount of knowledge and skills that are trained in these models with 10 trillion tokens, $200 million worth of training. But what you really need to focus on is the ability to incrementally learn conceptually in real time. And that's the cognitive AI approach. Now, if you compare the two approaches, it's really like chalk and cheese. The focus is on accessing existing knowledge versus acquiring new knowledge. I won't go through the list here. I think the slides will be shared as well. But it really is a very, very fundamental difference between the two approaches. So we've been working on this cognitive AI architecture from about for about the last 20 years. Now, unfortunately, like anti-aging research, we haven't had a lot of love in terms of significant investments. I seeded the company originally with the proceeds from my listed company when I exited that. I hired about 10 people. We worked for 5 years developing the core technology. And at that time, we had enough technology together, but we also needed to raise more money. So we transitioned into commercial mode. And, that's just, I call that the narrow AI trap. As soon as you are trying to produce a commercial product, or you're trying to beat a particular benchmark, or you're trying to do some particular thing well, you basically end up starting to hard code things and then going away from the sort of adaptive core intelligence that you need to build. So the next 5 years were spent basically on building a commercial company with the emphasis on scalability, redundancy, getting customers, and all of that stuff. Um, I ended up selling that company, or we ended up selling a company, and then basically I started what is now called AI, my current company. Again, hired about 10 people, and for 5 years we took the technology to the next level. And the same thing happened again. Basically, we needed to commercialize, so we very successfully commercialized, but it was a total distraction for the ultimate goal of getting to AGI. So we now, as I said, recently decided to, I think I have a slide for, yeah, that's the narrow AI trap that I've actually seen many other AGI projects that seem promising fall into that trap as soon as they try to, get funding, or try to beat certain existing benchmarks and so on. Then the focus is by hook or by crook to get that done. So I'll finish off by just saying, our company. So we have all of this uh, experience, both in terms of developing the core technology and then also what we learned from commercializing it. And we're now at a point where we basically believe we can get to human level AI with a relatively modest effort, because we don't need thousands of GPUs to train our system. You're talking about a few $1,000s, maybe, not hundreds of millions of dollars. And the goal is not to have a system that knows everything about everything. Our 24 months goal, pending on additional funding, is to get to roughly the language and reasoning ability of a 10-year-old, and at which point we will, I believe, reach financial escape velocity, where people will see, okay, this approach really can get us to true AGI, at which point it then becomes a matter of just raising enough money to scale up the system and teach it all of the other background knowledge that it needs to have. So I think I've probably covered as much of an overview as I want to right now. So I think we can go into Q&A.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Peter, for that great overview. And I am curious in regard to the list of weaknesses or limitations that you provided for large language models, why you think that each of these limitations cannot be fixed within the LLM generative AI framework. What prevents that framework from being able to overcome these problems inherently?
Yeah, as I say, people like Jan LeCun obviously have come to that same conclusion. I actually have, I live in Austin now, Austin, Texas, and I have a monthly meetup here, and one of the topics was actually focused on that. And I have a recording of that as well, which goes into some detail. So if the current generative AI technology, it's GPT. The G stands for generative. It literally makes up stuff from the 10 trillion or now 15, 20 trillion pieces of information that it was fed, good, bad, and ugly. It doesn't know what's good, what's bad, or what's ugly. So hallucination is an inherent feature of the approach, of the generative approach, of the transformer approach. Um, you can put guardrails around it to try and reduce them, but the more guardrails you put around it, the less of the power you're actually dumbing the system. You're dumbing the system down. Um, so hallucinations are pretty much a feature of the core technology. Now, the second thing is, GP, pre-trained, it's pre-trained. The model needs to have all of the information, all the 10, 20 trillion pieces of information needs to have that available up front. So it can number crunch that millions of times to basically build the model, to do the gradient descent, to build the model. But it's pre-trained at the factory. It cannot learn anything after. It cannot update that model in real time. In fact, I have a white paper published. I can share the link as well on that, where we actually did some research on very recent advances in what they call real-time learning or incremental learning, and we surveyed over 200 white papers, and there was not a single one that actually managed to update the core model. Not one. Cannot be done. The core model cannot be updated. You use external RAG databases, or you try to you do fine tuning, which is basically adding external things to it, but it cannot be done. So that's a very, very serious limitation. You can't have a scientist. You can't have really, any moderately complex function of the human that requires human intelligence that can get away with not learning in real time. And the new information needs to be integrated into your existing model. It can't just be tagged onto an input buffer. So, and GPT, and the T stands for transformers, which is the technology that has made this so powerful. It's a breakthrough, 7, 8 years ago, I think it was, that really makes these generative models so incredibly powerful. But it also locks you into this gradient descent and into the pre-training. So, and from an expense point of view, we now have the CEO of one of the top companies saying we might be looking at models that cost $100 billion to train. I mean, that's just absurd to try and then have specialized models for different things. So I think it clearly is on the wrong track.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer, Peter. And it's interesting because I think David Wood has some comments on this. In our internal chat, he writes that some of these limitations, at least it seems to him, have already been overcome, and some of the researchers who were initially sympathetic to Jan LeCun's off-ramp skepticism have warmed instead to the idea that LLMs can be a key part of the road to AGI. For example, Demis Hassabis sees the route to AGI as involving deep networks and a cognitive logical architecture. And David also says a number of researchers he has spoken to have told him that they're working on systems that can rewire their internal graph structure. So, David, perhaps you would like to elaborate on this.
Well, it's a fascinating presentation, and I'm very sympathetic to what Peter's trying to do. I wish his project really well. But I think the distinction between the power used by the human brain and the power used to train these large language models is misleading, because human brains did not start off as blank sheets. Human brains were trained by an enormously powerful process lasting hundreds of millions of years. It's evolution. Evolution is sort of the pre-training run for the human brain, and human brains emerge with huge amounts of instinctual mechanisms, the ability to spot patterns and believe in patterns. What we've got now with the generative models is They've had those large training runs, which have given them their instincts, and they can now do what's called one-shot or sometimes zero-shot learning. They can be shown, just like a human child, they can be shown a very small number of examples of a new concept, and they learn it straight away, as a human does. So, and that doesn't require this massive retraining process. So I think we've got to accept that intelligence comes from a combination of two things. There is the very long training process, whether it's by these deep neural networks for AI systems or the long period of evolution for humans. And in both cases, there is agility that can be put on top of it. And that agility often countermands the hallucinations, which the instinctive thing comes up with, we all the time coming up with patterns that aren't quite right. And then we have a rational brain that says, no, this isn't quite right. And modern generative AIs are very good at not hallucinating anymore. I've been chatting many times recently with Claude 3.5 Sonnet from Anthropic. Indeed, as I was listening to some of your remarks, Peter, I was prompted to ask it a whole range of questions because I wanted to check my understanding of something. And it gave a fascinatingly useful answer without any hallucinations. Some of the other systems do still hallucinate, but there is the possibility for the deep neural network part of the AI to be joined. As Demis Hassabis talks about, Gemini is a twin system. It's got the deep learning part, but it's also got the rational checking part. So I think that's how we're likely to reach AGI, not by ignoring large language models, but by combining large language models. However, I would be very interested if you can prove me wrong by demonstrating that your system can indeed do what you said it would do, which is to develop a system that had the reasoning and rational skills of a 10-year-old. That would be enormous if you could demonstrate that without benefit of the large language model training. So how far are you towards that? Do you have a system that has got the reasoning capability of a 6-year-old child, for example, or a 3-year-old child? Or what is the evidence you can show beyond just a nice set of slides and a hopeful forecast?
Yeah. So you covered a lot of different points, but let me answer. Obviously, this is not an investor pitch here. It just obviously I wanted to explain what I'm working on and why I'm working on what I am. We have built several prototypes which show the ability, show very good language ability, show good reasoning ability with very, very little training. In fact, we did this 6 years ago, and we have demos from 6 years ago, which was really the last time we seriously worked on moving the core technology forward. So, we have demonstrated that you can have very good language and reasoning capability. Now, the way we implemented it, it had too many human-crafted constructs in there. Basically, it didn't learn language from the ground up the way a child does. So our current effort, which we only really started just a few months ago, we're still building the team for this. The language and reasoning ability need to be learned from the ground up and not have human configured rules in there. So we have some evidence from prior development of what is possible with our approach, basically a super high performance knowledge graph that is the backbone of everything. But yeah, we can, I'm obviously very happy we are talking to a number of investors right now, and that's obviously the question they ask. Now, by the time we can show the language learning ability and reasoning ability of a 10-year-old, as I say, that'll be, financial escape velocity. We'll have to beat people away with a stick. So, at what point prior to that, is our story convincing enough? Now, but let me go back to the support for large language models that you gave. So yes, people are trying to build, and I guess it's sort of under the heading of neurosymbolic. If the first of all, if the symbolic system is anything like traditional symbolic systems of the past, we know they are too brittle, and you know that's going to end in tears. The second thing is, if these two systems aren't deeply integrated with each other, if you can't have top-down activation of the right parts of your system one, if you consider the large language model to be system one and your logic system to be system two, if they are not deeply integrated, you can't have this interactive, dynamic, top-down activation and bottom-up activation. You're really not going to achieve human-level intelligence. In our brain, these two systems are, very close. They're really not separate systems as such. They're just, for us, logically, we tend to separate them out. So that is why I think one of the links we have here is our approach is an integrated neurosymbolic architecture, and our subsymbolic representation and symbolic representation all happen in the same substrate. So there's not a distinction between these two, so they can seamlessly switch from one to the other. And I believe that's essential. I think anybody trying to build neurosymbolic systems by plugging together a large language model with a reasoning engine is going to just hit the same problems that traditional reasoning engines have had. And the point still stands that these systems cannot update their core model. And the link that's up here for the importance of real-time learning actually links to the white paper that I have. So if your point of evolution, sure, is kind of a neat analogy saying, hey, evolution, put all of this compute to build the brain, and of course that's true. But it doesn't mean that the compute that's being put into these large language models is achieving the same thing. In fact, we know it's not achieving the same thing because you don't end up with the plasticity of the human brain that we have. In fact, I got a chance to speak to Elon Musk for half an hour about our project recently, and the analogy I used for him was, right now it's like we're building disposable rockets. We spend 100 million or 200 billion or maybe 100 billion soon to build these models. We use them for a while, and then we throw them away. Whereas with the human brain, what evolution builds allows us to then, become a scientist or whatever. So I think the fact that the two systems need to be deeply integrated and work together, the fact that you need real-time learning and conceptualization, that you really need metacognition, metacognitive control system, and so on. I don't think those problems are going to go away by tweaking large language models.
How are you going to solve the brittleness problem that you described?
Well, because our knowledge graph has a vector representation, so you inherently have this fuzzy matching right through the system, and it can basically get biased. Our system is not built on formal logic at all. We know formal logic is not going to get us there.
So it's a bit similar to the probabilistic programming languages that Stuart Russell has been advocating for quite a few years, where he says we've got to move beyond strict logic and embodying probability in some of these connections. Because you mentioned the word fuzzy.
Maybe a bit. I mean, they were really never quite developed. Peter Norvig, I know
yes.
You may have been there like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. He said if we can get probabilistic logic working, then we'll solve AGI, and something like that. But really, my starting point is understanding how the mind works and what is important in human cognition and concept formation. In fact, one of our white papers is sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek. Concepts is all you need, but the importance of concepts, and I don't hear anybody really talking about that. Now, another problem that you have in large language models, and here's getting a little bit technical, is The vector representation in large language models is like word to vec. It's basically a fixed size vector that represents the concept, if we can call it that. It represents this concept by word similarities, by word co-occurrence, and and that can work reasonably well at times, but it's fundamentally not the way concepts need to be encoded. Concepts need to be coded ontologically, basically tied to the real world. And in large language models, that only happens by accident. I mean, obviously, I think we're all blown away by what large language models can achieve. Make no bones about it. I don't think anybody expected large language models to become as competent as they have just by through scaling. But in if you encode concepts ontologically, they don't have a fixed size, vector size. And the vectors themselves must represent ontological features in the real world that they represent, that represent that concept. And as I say, in large language models, that only really happens, by accident. So that's kind of another part where I'm, from a theoretical point of view, once you understand that concepts and concept formation, conceptualization, conceptual thinking are so key to human intelligence and cognition.
Yes, thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I definitely have a lot of sympathy for your viewpoint, Peter, because my intuition has been from using large language models, there's no way that they could make the full leap to AGI. They will, in my view, always remain narrow AI models. But to the points that David was making, I think the capabilities of those narrow AI models can and will surprise us. In fact, I was saying as recently as 6 months ago, I'll start believing that there's some threat from narrow AI and large language models when one of them can generate for me a building with perfectly symmetrical windows. And just a few days ago, I was informed of a generative AI program that creates some fascinating artworks called Flux AI. And those of you who want to see some Renaissance style space fortresses that I asked it to generate with symmetrical windows and some quite realistic looking architectural features, please follow this Facebook link. And it's interesting that you have this slide now here in terms of the key differences between generative AI and cognitive AI. I do tend to agree with you, Peter. I don't think all of these differences could be overcome by the current architectures of generative AI. Now, our viewer Super Fin Guy wonders, when you refer to version 9 that you currently have available of your platform, I think he just wants clarification, version 9 of what software or what system are you referring to here?
Yeah, that is our cognitive architecture, and it's just the name we've given it, the iterations we've gone through. Our version 5 was the last kind of demo software that we had, was AGI demo software. We then went into commercialization and had version 6, 7, and 8, and basically we now did a major reboot. Now that we're concentrating on AGI, we threw out all the stuff that was there just for the commercial aspects. We threw all of that away. We reintroduced Vision. Our first development system in 2001 already had Vision. In fact, it was a virtual critter in a virtual world, learning how to do stuff in the virtual world. And had initially we had a virtual mouse which had virtual whiskers and nose and ears. But we then kind of moved towards a vision system. But then when we commercialized for call center applications, we took that out. So in version 9, we stripped out all the stuff we needed for commercialization and reintroduced vision, which we believe is important for grounding, to be able to learn grounded concepts.
It's interesting. One quick idea that occurred to me is that this kind of approach that you're describing would be great for creating robotic pets. Like if you have this virtual critter that you described instantiated in a robot body, and it can learn kind of like, say, a dog or a cat might, that would be more engaging than current robot pets, which are still fairly limited. I wonder if that could be an auxiliary income stream for you while you work toward full-fledged AGI.
Yeah, well, let me just again emphasize that as soon as you try to do anything specifically commercially viable, you fall into the narrow AI trap. 90%, if not 100% of your energy goes into, by hook or by crook, making this little toy critter thing seem intelligent and bring it to market. And it's a you're doing completely different work. You're not focusing on solving the core cognitive problems you need to solve. If we got to the learning our ability, we actually are just to complete the story with Elon Musk. I spoke to him on the day that European Union tried to shut him down, and he had his first rocket failure in 5 years. So he still spoke to me for 30 minutes and asked some good questions. But he's an engineer, and when I started talking about cognitive psychology and why it's important to understand what human intelligence is, he kind of tuned out and said, well, intelligence is as intelligence does, which is sort of like fortune cookie philosophy in my mind. And so, he said, can you show me something that you have? So we are working on building a prototype of, a 4-year-old maybe, or some aspects of 4-year-old language learning and reasoning ability in order for us to get the larger amount of funding that we need. I mean, we need to hire, we have enough specific work for about 50 extra people that, we can't currently afford. So really what to work on is we need to work on the things that are required to get to AGI, and trying to do anything commercial in the meantime or something, it just goes off the rails. And to your point though of saying, if I actually firmly believe if you had true cognitive learning ability of an animal at animal level, let's say a dog level, getting from there to human level, it would actually be easy. If we could build dog level intelligence, I mean, I think somebody should get the Nobel Prize or whatever for that. But what you're going to do with it commercially, toys. So you're really focusing on human language capability and reasoning capability, because that's when it becomes obvious that this is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. Working on toys that might be worth at best a few $100 million, when shifting your effort onto AGI is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. It just makes no sense. So yeah, that now whether our approach will work, whether we'll hit a brick wall somewhere along the line, of course we won't know until we go through the scaling. But as I say, we have already proven our system in bits and pieces over the years, been quite commercially successful. One of our customers is 1-800-Flowers and Harry and David group of companies, and this last Valentine's Day we replaced 3,000 agents with our technology. But the problem was that version of our technology had way too many human crafted rules and capabilities, and we've always known that, but it was sort of expedient for us. Hey, we've got to get this thing to work robustly to give customer service. How can we do that the quickest way? And teaching that a child level language and child level reasoning is obviously not the fastest way, but it is the correct way.
Yes, Thank you very much, Peter. And to reinforce your point, David wrote that Peter's notion of the narrow AI trap into which AGI companies can fall is an important one. Companies all too easily get distracted into options for making money from narrow AI variants. So thank you for that, David.
Yeah, it's actually, I want to just add to that, it's actually worse than that. It's not just making money. It's even trying to beat benchmarks, because people, often ask us, well, what benchmarks can you beat, or how do you do against the LLM benchmarks, and so on. As soon as we try to do that, then our effort goes into how can we do that by hook or by crook. And then again, you have the external human intelligence that is solving the problem of how to get closer to the benchmarks. You have these, what is the new benchmark that people are excited about, that these visual puzzles. Anyway, it's the external intelligence basically that then figures out how to be good at solving those puzzles, or getting a grant proposal, and getting funding for ongoing grant work. Any of these things where the motivation isn't to get to AGI in the correct way, is you fall into a narrow AI trap. And
yes.
I've seen this, a number of promising AGI approaches.
Yes. And Bill, I'm sure you have some thoughts about the perils of businesses being distracted from their core mission. So please go ahead with any remarks either on that or other questions or comments you might have for Peter.
I was not going to pursue that particular question, but I do want to change subjects. So I just, before I do, I want to make certain that Jose didn't want to contribute towards the discussion that's ongoing right now, and then I could come to my questions later after Jose talks.
Bill, I have a question for you. How plausible does it seem to you if we have this, college graduate, smart college graduate, that can teach itself to be an anti-aging researcher, cancer researcher, or whatever, and you can now make 1 million copies of that, and they can, learn to specialize in different things and cooperate. I mean, does this sort of sound like magic we need?
If they can pass the application process that I have for hiring scientists, yes. Okay, absolutely. Because as far as I'm concerned, I prefer scientists that are more like robots than people. So I would look forward to that. But so since Jose didn't say anything, let me go ahead and well, first of all, I want to say I was very glad to see that when you started, you talked about how the term AI was created 9 years ago. And the reason why I was glad is because a lot of people think that AI is a brand new science, and it's not. It's been around for a long, long time. And towards that end, I took a lot of courses in AI when I was a cognitive psychology major at UC San Diego in the early to mid 1970s. And there was a remarkably different difference between AI then and now. And so what I want to just describe first is when I was taking, I think I took 3 different classes called artificial intelligence 1, 2, and 3. But the emphasis was to make computers actually answer questions or solve problems in the same way that a human would, as a way of studying the human mind. Okay, for instance, my thesis was, I went around and I asked like 100 different people. I said, what day is today? And as soon as they'd give me the answer, I'd say, okay, now before you forget, how did you figure that out? And I went through the process of exactly, because they would actually like just be waking up from a dream, and all of a sudden, oh my God, I can tell you exactly what I did and go through it. And so I then for the thesis, I wrote computer programs so that when the computer was asked what day it would answer the question the same way that the humans did. Okay, so that doesn't seem to be the emphasis of AI anymore. And when you mentioned your 3 waves, that wasn't one of the things that I saw in the 3 waves. Is that no longer an emphasis of AI to to actually use AI as a way of studying how the human mind works by writing programs that actually answer questions the same way a human mind would?
Yeah, a very good question. Well, the third wave, we really, I mean, we are one of very, very few companies or organizations working on cognitive AI or the third wave. I mean, the second wave is really, we have a monoculture. I mean, all the money, everything. In fact, I have a little anecdote here. I had a brilliant intern from Germany work for me, and he totally got into cognitive AI, and we loved him, and he loved the work. He went back to Germany to do his PhD. He couldn't get a sponsor for cognitive AI, so he ended up spending 7 years doing large language models, and that he's now lost to the cause. I don't know if you worked with Paul Churchland in the day or so, but cognitive science used to be a much bigger deal, in the, I guess, 80s, 90s, and 20 years ago. It's just about all but disappeared now. It's all about big data, statistical learning, and mathematical approaches, and that's a great pity that we don't have that. But to your question as to in cognitive science, the people interested in AI, they're really the two camps that sometimes overlap. But the one camp is they want cognitive science and AI to understand how the human mind works, and that's the motivation, and that's really all they care about. And then the other camp is basically people like myself. Is yes, that's interesting to the extent that it can help me build AGI, but only to that extent. I'm not trying to reverse engineer the brain. I'm not trying to reverse engineer birds. I'm trying to get a flying machine. Well, I'm trying to get a thinking machine, So to me, understanding how the brain works or how the mind works or how humans solve problems to the extent that it can inspire the design, the AGI design, that's great. But apart from that, yes, it's interesting how the human mind works, but that's not my focus. But there are people who really focus on that entirely, and they're not interested in building AGI.
I just believe that the future of AGI, and when we actually have robots that are indistinguishable from humans, it's going to be important that we bring back that part of AI, just so that the robots are more human. Because I think a lot of it's going to be not just what the answer is, but how the answer came about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AGIs will be good researchers, and they'll be good cognitive science researchers too. And
the term AGI didn't exist back then, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, right.
It is really AGI we're talking about.
Right.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's a fascinating conversation in terms of whether to design AGIs along the same kinds of architecture that human minds have, or whether to pursue a different approach. But Jose, please go ahead.
Yes, fascinating discussion. And Peter, I want to ask you about your timing. You mentioned 5 years. So how do you get that number, 5 years? And also, second part of that question, I am reading again now the book, The Singularity is Nearer, again. And then Ray talks about his 2 magic dates that he has kept for about almost 40 years. As you know, 2029 to 2030, passing the Alan Turing test and reaching longevity escape velocity, and 2045, the singularity and immortality through biological rejuvenation. So anyway, those are raised dates, and you have 5 years. You talked about 5 years. So how do you get those 5 years, and what do you think of Ray Kurzweil's dates?
Yeah, so in fact, I tend to hedge it when I talk about 5 years. That is subject to actually getting funding, or subject, not necessarily just our company, but cognitive AI getting the love that it needs. And that may not happen. I mean, we could be 10 years from here and people are still trying to glob together logic systems with large language models and, finding that isn't working. I mean, there's so much money being thrown at it. I'm not sure when, when that bubble will burst or if it'll deflate or another bubble will come up. So subject to the right approach getting funded, which at the moment is not happening. Absolutely, I believe it can be less than 5 years. And the reason for that, I think their LLMs are actually giving us a taste of AGI. They're giving us a taste that the amount of computing power that you have, and when you use an LLM in inference, it doesn't actually use that much computing power. You can run it on a expensive local machine. So it's giving us a taste of just how much cognition is actually possible with current hardware. So I think, if anything, we have a hardware overhang. We have more than enough hardware. But even if I'm wrong about that, I don't think we're far away from the amount of hardware we need. There may be some other specialized, like GPUs, but maybe some other FPGAs or something that need to be designed to really get AGI to full human, level thinking. So I don't think there's a hardware limitation. And from my own work, I'm just totally convinced that an approach like ours, a cognitive AI approach, and not necessarily specifically how we are going about it, but that kind of approach that starts with understanding what is important in human intelligence, concept formation, real-time integration of knowledge, being able to adapt metacognition, those things. If people seriously address them and build architectures that address those core requirements of intelligence, I see no reason why we can't have full human level AGI in 5 years or less. Now, your question on Ray's predictions, I've always been puzzled by this huge gap that he has between, and I can't quite, you can probably correct me here, of the first date when he says the first AGI or the first human level AI is, and then full AGI is like 7 years later or 6 years later. That makes really no sense to me, because then the first thing isn't human level. I mean, we've had machines that are better, that are at human level or superhuman level in specific areas, playing chess for 25 years. So I don't see that gap. Now, actually, there is something else I want to talk about that I think is quite important, and that also came across with my discussion with Robin Hanson recently and Anders Sandberg. That they're both super smart, super well educated in AI, but they both seem to have the idea, as I think most people actually have in AI, that we are going to solve AGI sort of one narrow thing at a time, which is kind of the way LLMs are going. You say, well, it can already do this task at human level or superhuman level. Now, if we put more effort in, can do another task and another task, another task. And then you could have this sort of slow introduction of, human level AI being introduced, that there are going to be some things that are just harder and harder and take another 10 years. But to me, that's not AGI. If you have a system, definition of the original dream of AI, to have thinking machines that can think, learn, and reason the way humans do. A smart human can learn any of these domains in a short period of time, and the computer will be able to learn quicker. So once you have AGI that can solve one of these problems, it'll be able to solve all of the problems very, very shortly afterwards. It's just a matter of it then acquiring the knowledge and having the training material and so on. So I don't get that gap at all. AGI implies singularity. Basically, when a computer can think, learn, and reason the way humans can do, it'll be able to do every cognitive task, and then you can put them in a robot, and very quickly robots will also have that common sense that you can actually put them in a kitchen, and they can potentially, you trust them with your grandkids.
Yes, thank you, Peter, for those responses. And we have some different feedback in the YouTube chat. So David writes, I totally agree with Peter's puzzlement about the 16-year gap between the two dates highlighted by Ray Kurzweil. As soon as we get human-level AGI, there's very likely to be a fast takeoff. On the other hand, Serendipity's muse writes, maybe the progress gap in Kurzweil's estimation is due to inertia of the human acceptance process. So we know that just because a technology becomes available doesn't mean it gets adopted or commercialized. There may be pushback, there may be late adopters. Like today, there are still people who are reluctant to use computers, not just the internet or mobile phones, but even computers. And over time, we will expect that demographic to diminish, but there may be just an understandable gap between the technical availability of a technology and social acceptance. And this, I would say, is a more general observation with regard to Kurzweil's predictions. Kurzweil himself has reflected upon his previous timeframes, for instance, for autonomous vehicles, where he originally predicted that autonomous vehicles would arrive by 2009. And afterward, he said, well, yes, technically the ability to develop autonomous vehicles was there in 2009, and DARPA had performed all of these tests of autonomous vehicles successfully navigating the roads of the US. But of course, getting them mass produced and getting the public acceptance of their adoption has been such a challenge that most vehicles on the roads today are not autonomous. So that may be the gap. And there has already been a 15-year gap between 2009 and today when most vehicles on the road are not autonomous. So what do you think about that?
I think he's trying a bit too hard to justify his predictions there. No, autonomous vehicles were not possible in 2009. Totally autonomous vehicles that they can drive anywhere, anytime a human can drive. They're not available now. And I mean, I love my Tesla, but no, we are nowhere near because ultimately it'll require that system 2 higher level thinking to be able to deal with really abnormal, that long tail, abnormal circumstances. So full self-driving, autonomous self-driving anywhere under any conditions is an AI complete problem. It'll require artificial general intelligence. Now, can Tesla have robo-taxis, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions maybe? Yes, in particular routes. I mean, we already have, robo-taxis working now. But there's a difference between that and being able to handle any situation that a human can handle. And of course, they can also measure it. Is it on average statistically safer than a human? Well, they may beat that benchmark sooner as well, because humans are a lot of bad drivers out there,
Absolutely. And I think even deploying today's technology in terms of the level of autonomy would be a huge improvement over human drivers. But to your point, yes, Tesla's vehicles right now are of level 2 autonomy on the conventional scale from 0 to 5, and the robo-taxis, I would say, are of level 4 autonomy. That is to say, they can be fully autonomous within a kind of predefined domain, but they can't really venture outside of that domain. We don't have any true level 5 autonomy yet. But since we're on the subject of Ray Kurzweil, I wanted to ask you regarding your thoughts on Kurzweil's book, How to Create a Mind. And I actually wrote a review of How to Create a Mind back in 2018. Readers can access it at the link below. But Ray Kurzweil advocates what he calls a pattern recognition theory of mind. And I'm curious how that aligns with or diverges from your approach. And do you think that what Ray Kurzweil has outlined is sufficient to create artificial general intelligence, or is he mistaken there?
Yeah. I also got the book when he first published it, and I have the T-shirt that I got with it. I still wear it on special occasions. I would generally agree that pattern recognition, pattern matching is really key to intelligence. And the way I interpret that, though, is really as concept formation, both static and temporal concepts. I was not super impressed with the book in terms of, how much detail it gave. I mean, it certainly wasn't a blueprint to building a mine. So I thought it was very, very disappointing. And of course, it's that disappointment has been proven when he joined Google after he wrote the book. He had unlimited resources, and clearly he hasn't made any progress towards AGI. I mean, he spent 10 years now doing Gmail autocomplete. So clearly the book, has some generally right ideas, but it's a very far cry from a blueprint for actually creating AGI.
Yes. Well, thank you for your assessment. And David also wrote in our chat the progress gap in Kurzweil between the predictions and the reality is actually because he overconvinces himself about the supposed ineluctability of his law of accelerating returns, an extension of Moore's law. And this has been an ongoing subject of discussion and debate within the transhumanist community as well. Back in 2002, Ray Kurzweil had a conversation with Max Moore, and Max Moore was saying at the time, well, no, progress is not inevitable. It depends on institutional factors. It depends on societal acceptance. It depends on regulatory barriers to innovation and how severe those barriers are. But on the other hand, Ray Kurzweil has stuck to his time frame for the arrival of human level intelligence, which he says will happen by 2029. And it's interesting that you have posited essentially a similar time frame, provided that your approach gets adequate funding. So do you think Kurzweil could still be right, provided that your approach receives a lot more support than it has thus far?
Yes, of course, except what he posits for 2029 is not the singularity. And where I would say basically the singularity happens almost, immediately after, I mean, within a few years, just as whatever, as the computers are built up. So I think there's a lot of disappointment right now in large language models. Gary Marcus is obviously exaggerating things, but the bubble is looking pretty precarious right now. And on the commercial side, I actually have quite a bit of experience on the commercial side. 18 months ago, every enterprise company we spoke to said, we're looking at large language models and they're going to handle our customer support, and basically they don't need IGO, for customer support. So it was probably pretty rough for us because, all of the potential customers we had kind of, we're going to be looking at large language models. Now, a year later, about 6 months ago, we caught up with a lot of these people and they're saying, well, we've come to the conclusion, no, this can't be customer facing. They're nowhere near. And in fact, we now are hearing more and more companies are scaling down their large language model efforts because they're just not getting the results. They're not getting, getting the payback. So it's not. I think a lot of investors are, again, you can almost taste AGI. It seems so near and yet so far. And so I think investors will be more and more open to alternate stories, and especially in neurosymbolic, that it just has to be the right kind of neurosymbolic approach. In fact, that's why I renamed our baby INSA, integrated neurosymbolic architecture, because I think that's a good description of, I think, the right approach. Neurosymbolic, system 1, system 2 working together, effectively, I think is the right approach. So I think there's a very good chance that money will flow into others. Now, the money is first going to go to the usual suspects, the large companies, and they're going to struggle. But there'll be people spinning off companies, that have enough money to have with better ideas. So I think there's a very good chance that we will see human level AGI within 5 years, whether from us or from somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that would
Now
be
the adoption part of it, though, that was one of the kind of very interesting insights, the discussions I had with Robin Hanson was, I really wanted to pick his brain to say, well, how do you see the deployment? How do you see it affecting the economy once we get AGI? And suddenly you can literally replace every desk-bound job in the world at a lower cost and better efficiency. And the discussion very quickly came to the point that there's going to be an enormous amount of resistance from all sorts of trade unions and government employees and lawyers and I mean there are going to be all sorts of special interest groups that are going to do this kicking and screaming, and they're going to try and prohibit competitors from using AI for that. Now you won't be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, it might turn out that, I don't know, Singapore suddenly allows AGI and it becomes, the world leader. Something like it. I mean, Europe is shooting itself terribly in the foot.
Yes, and our viewer Serendipity's Muse writes, government regulation almost always favors large companies and is a barrier to smaller and younger ones. AI regulation would, in their opinion, be a disaster. Well, I think it's important when one regulates something to know what one is regulating. And right now, I would say every government in the world is falling short of the requisite knowledge. But in particular, with AGI, I just see so many benefits in terms of being able to solve the problem of biological aging, being able to solve problems of material scarcity or problems of governance even. And we've got here the impact of AGI from Peter's slide deck. And yes, my thoughts are exactly aligned with that. I wonder if there's a way to introduce the benefits so quickly that the special interests won't be able to mount a resistance. That would seem to be the most feasible path, because we know what happened with large language models. Now, interestingly enough, large language models set off this panic about AI, and I would say some people overestimated the capabilities of large language models and even ventured to speculate that they might become Terminator types of AIs. And yet in day-to-day usage, people are utilizing image generation models. They are utilizing ChatGPT and other chatbots, and they're using them to great effect. There has been some, I would say, impact on job displacement, but it hasn't been catastrophic at this time. We don't have, say, even 10% unemployment right now. So
it's minuscule at this point. I mean, in fact, it's creating more jobs because you need a human in the loop, and so many people are trying to get these things to do useful things. So, I mean, we're certainly not seeing unemployment because of LLMs. I mean, some dislocation, obviously, and some copywriting and so on. Yeah,
yes,
but
indeed.
you mentioned I think something that's really important in using AGI for governance. I think there's a good point to be made that we probably need AGI to save us from ourselves, because we don't seem to be very good at coming up with ways of actually managing society. And I think applying more intelligence to this problem, and again, having this little angel on your shoulder that maybe will tell you, well, does that really make sense what you want to do here, or the person you want to vote for? Are you sure you want that kind of outcome? Or maybe there's a better way of dealing with that. So, yeah, that's another, I think, fantastic advantage. I think that'll make us better people.
Yes, and it's interesting. Our friend Super Fin Guy in the YouTube chat says he likes LLMs better than a lot of people. They are way more thoughtful and nicer. And well, yes, LLMs are not going to troll somebody online unless there's some rogue LLM that's designed for that purpose. I have actually had to censor some bots in our U.S. Transhumanist Party Discord server, but that's a whole other story. These were bots that were designed specifically to be snarky, but most LLMs are not like that. But Peter, I wanted to ask you with regard to your thoughts on the path to AGI and how far along you think we are now versus what your thoughts were back in 2017 when we participated in the Freedom Fest panel together. How has your outlook changed from then to now, if it has changed at all? And do you have more optimism about our ability to reach AGI, less optimism, or about the same level contingent on appropriate funding and support for your approach?
Yeah, I think even at an earlier conference, at one of the Singularity Summits, way back, I think around about the same time that Ben Goertzel also said, we believe we could get AGI within 7 years at the time, and that would have been, actually, I don't remember how long ago, long time ago. So, and I don't remember what the Freedom Fest panel, specifically what I said there, but I'm sure it was somewhere along the lines of we could have it in 7 years or less. That's always been my feeling. So obviously, I have a lot more evidence now with the power of large language models with ChatGPT, what it can do. That gives me even more confidence that AGI is possible with pretty much current hardware, or somewhere close to current hardware. So in that sense, it hasn't really changed, but there's more evidence in my mind that we can have it.
Yes,
I would
indeed.
like to make one comment about the regulation, and I think somebody said that it favors large companies. Absolutely, there's this regulatory capture, which is terrible, but that's just the way it works. Now, with cognitive AI, the beauty is the regulation is all about large language models, over a certain size. And with a cognitive AI, just don't have that. So completely under the radar as far as AGI development is concerned.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for those responses, Peter. And now let us go to Art Ramon for his question.
Yes, you said that you had an account with 1-800-Flowers and it was successful, but there was also a trial with fast food places, and they were trying to do the drive-through order rate, and they failed. So why did they fail and yours succeeded?
Well, because we have better technology, obviously. Well, actually, that is very much part of it, but it's only one part of it. I'm not claiming that we would have succeeded at McDonald's, but the technology that they used, and there were various trials. It wasn't just one, but McDonald's was one of them. Basically, are using statistical systems. And statistical systems don't have the metacognition. They're not a cognitive architecture. They don't know what they're saying. They can't think about what is reasonable. So if you say, I want 30 packets of mustard with my ice cream cone because it mishears, they don't have the common sense to say, well, maybe I should ask to confirm you mean mustard or something else. So they don't have cognition, these systems, but the drive-through on fast foods is actually very, very challenging, and that is because speech recognition. Basically, a lot of the failures are simply the speech recognition. You have people playing the radio in the car while they're there, and humans are actually extremely good at being able to pick out particular voices and filter out the rest. And humans also know when they don't know something, when to ask to confirm. What did you say? Can you say that again? Did you say this or do you say that? These statistical systems, large language models approaches don't do that. They might fall below a certain threshold, and then they'll say, I didn't get that. Can you say that again? But if they have something that they recognize, they'll go ahead and use the wrong information. There's actually also, getting a little bit more technical, there's also another problem that we actually solved in our commercial endeavor with speech recognition, or solved in a better way. Typically, the speech recognition engine, the speech engine, is a completely separate thing. So the speech engine basically takes whatever sound and produces a bunch of words. And then those words are fed into the large language model, and it basically then tries to turn that into an order. But because these systems are separate, it's not the way our mind works. As we start speaking, we anticipate and tune our hearing. We hear different things. We bias our hearing towards what we expect to hear, based on the conversation, based on common sense, and so on. Those designs don't do that. And actually, early on already in our commercial venture, we did exactly that. We actually had our brain bias the speech recognition engine towards what you would expect to hear, rather than having it completely open-ended. So it's again that integration between the hearing part and the thinking part, in the same way you need integration between system 1 and system 2 thinking. So they don't have that. So I believe we could do a better job of it, but it's really, really hard. And the speech recognition technology isn't there yet, actually, quite frankly, for this low grade accent, background noise, and so on. It's just a really, really hard problem.
Now, what if you combined it with visual and also like lip reading? Would that help?
I don't know. I've never looked into that. Yeah, okay. I don't know.
They did it on Hal, on that in the movie. Hal was a lip reader. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. And Alan Crowley, our friend and supporter, writes, so all that time working on autofill could pay off yet. So thank you for that comment, Alan. And we have a lot of interesting questions from our audience. Mike DeVerde wonders if you, Peter, are familiar with David Kelly's ICOM, which is the Independent Core Observer model, which is architected based on human brain processes per the global workspace theory of Bernard Bars. And there's a paper by David Kelly from 2021 called Applying Independent Core Observer Model Cognitive Architecture to a Collective Intelligence System. This is the architecture that was used for the Uplift AI, which we featured on a virtual enlightenment salon in 2021. And we've also had David Kelly as a guest on 2 occasions. And furthermore, now David Kelly's company, Artificial General Intelligence Labs, has developed a new system called Norn, which is essentially the next step in the evolution of these models. So what do you think of that framework? How does it compare and contrast with your own, Peter?
I'm actually not that familiar with what they're doing recently. I know I spoke with David many years ago. My understanding of his architecture is very heavily based on emotions, emotional system, if I remember correctly. I really don't know enough about it to have very intelligent comments. I should probably catch up with him and find out what he thinks. Does he think his system can get to AGI, the kind of AGI, real AGI, that I'm talking about, that can be a scientist? And if so, what does he think is in the way? What prevents him? Does he just need a check for $100 million and he'll get to AGI? And then that would be an interesting discussion to have. Or is he pursuing something much more narrow, which almost all AGI companies that have AGI in their title, or that say they're doing AGI, really aren't doing AGI. If you ask them, well, do you have a roadmap to AGI, a specific roadmap to AGI? And I haven't really come across anyone who has. I mean, Ben Goertzel has a sort of roadmap to AGI, which is largely a collection of narrow AIs, which I don't see how that'll get us there. But at least it's one theory you can have, is we have enough narrow AIs that somehow that general intelligence will emerge from that. But I actually don't know of any companies that even claim to have a clear path to AGI. So be interesting to talk to David and find out.
Yes, indeed. And my impressions from 3 years ago were that Uplift was not an AGI, but Uplift was impressive in certain ways that today's large language model based chatbots are not. In particular, Uplift had a long-term memory, and it remembered all of the people it interacted with. It remembered essentially the context and content of those interactions. And furthermore, it could reach out to people independently and ask them questions, like the way I started an email dialogue with Uplift, and Uplift could only communicate via email. Was that Uplift reached out to me, and it had some questions about aspects of the US Transhumanist Party's Transhumanist Bill of Rights. So that was fascinating to me because it showed a certain degree of agency. Now, that being said, Uplift was consuming a lot more time to generate each of the responses and process the human input that was provided to it. Uplift also had a structure where it depended on human mediators, and the mediators didn't so much feed content into it as configured certain what were called emotional valences. And that was an interesting aspect of Uplift's design as well, that it was designed on the basis of having human-like emotions. And we have a comment from our friend John H., who writes, what we'll really need is feeling machines, specifically machines that can experience empathy. Otherwise, we could end up with super intelligent cybernetic sociopaths and psychopaths. So what do you think about the approach of trying to align the emotions of AIs, to the extent they can experience emotions, with human emotions, so that there could be an understanding on the part of the AIs of how human minds work? That's one perspective. But of course, another perspective is sometimes our emotions are the problem, and we humans are prone to so many irrational emotions that lead to self-destructive activities and activities that are generally suboptimal. Any negative sum game can be traced to somebody's irrational emotion. So is it really beneficial to have AIs feel the same emotions as we can, or is it actually beneficial to have the AGIs functioning on a different set of premises?
Yes, a very good question. And I've certainly given emotions a lot of thought of where they fit in. So you have metacognition, and that's kind of being aware of your thought processes and the mental state. For the purpose of AGI, I tend to divide emotions into two groups. The one group is what I call cognitive emotions, or emotions necessary for cognition. So that would be things like certainty, confusion, surprise, boredom. They are essential for the cognitive processes to work. So they're an integral part of the cognitive architecture. The other emotions are sort of call them reptile brain emotions, which are basically for survival and reproduction. So those would be things like anger, love, lust, things of that nature. Now, I don't believe it makes sense to build those into the core metacognitive process of an AGI system. Having said that, an AGI, if it's a general learning machine, will inherently be very good at recognizing emotions, human emotions, the full spectrum of human emotions. And of course, it can have additional inputs. It could have voice stress analysis or facial analysis or whatever things might turn out to be useful, in addition to semantic clues. So it will be able to recognize human emotions very well and learn how to respond to them. And think of it more like a competent psychologist. A competent psychologist is not empathetic in the sense that when you're angry, you also get angry, or when you start crying, that they also start crying. A good psychologist is able to analyze emotions and then be able to manage the situation appropriately for the person. So that's how I see. I don't think you want AGIs to have those, reptile brain emotions.
Yes, so they shouldn't be experiencing those emotions directly, but having an understanding of those
Correct.
emotions would be helpful for the AGI.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
Yes, that's an excellent answer. Thank you, Peter, for that. And there has been a discussion that has been ongoing throughout the chat about essentially the core goals of AGI research altogether. And there is a school of thought that what we need to concentrate on is improving human intelligence. So Alan Crowley thinks this is a great topic, but his cynical inclinations suggest we need to spend more time developing human intelligence. And Crucial Flow Research, who seems to be quite skeptical of AGI, says people who want AGI are too lazy to think for themselves, and the more you rely on outside intelligence, the less involved you are in creativity and living life. Now, I don't agree with that perspective. I'm inclined to agree with Mike Lazine to a greater extent. He would consider it more of a collaboration between humans and AIs. But for instance, when I've used large language models, I did not find my creativity diminishing. In fact, I could test creative ideas that would just take too long to execute with previous generations of technologies. Whereas, for instance, a large language model can generate a scenario for a short story, or, for instance, a generative AI art program could draw me a painting that may not be a masterpiece necessarily, but it could essentially illustrate something that would have just been an idea in my mind previously, and then I could tweak it, iterate upon it. So I haven't found a diminution to my creativity. But what is your response to people who say, well, AI and AGI eventually will just become a substitute for human thinking and a substitute for creativity?
Yes, I think there was, if I remember correctly, it was on Twitter, a lady was saying, I expected AI to do my washing and dishes for me so that I could concentrate on my art. And now AI is doing my art and I'm doing the dishes and washing. So where we are right now, obviously it is taking over some of these sort of creative tasks badly in many cases, but it's doing that. But to your point, it's also used as a tool for people, because it's the prompt engineering, the tweaking on how to use the tools to get out, and the evaluation of, is the result something that I find pleasing, because they can't do that. So I think using it as a tool to boost creativity certainly is true. Now, the point of we should rather increase human intelligence than to work on AGI. Well, we're not doing a very good job of that, are we? In fact, humanity seems to be getting dumber. If you, I mean, let's look at politics, for example. It's just atrocious. So good luck with making humans smarter. I mean, our educational system is a disaster and getting worse. So I don't know how we're going to do that without AGI. I think AGI can actually help us make humans smarter again. Again, that little angel on your shoulder can help you think things through, motivate you, and help you flourish in life. Now, in terms of upgrading our brain, in terms of becoming smarter, and Elon Musk thinks that having Neuralink that might be able to have us merge with AGI and so on. We're not going to be able to upgrade our brains anytime soon. I actually wrote an article more than 20 years ago on that. And I listed like 10 points of why we are going to have AGI long before we're going to have um, intelligence augmentation or significant, intelligence augmentation. But I can just take out the one point, FDA. I mean, that by itself, you're talking decades before, any serious intelligence augmentation internally in the brain is possible. We're going to have external intelligence augmentation, which we already have in many ways, calculators and tools and so on. But with AGI, we're going to have the psychological coupling, that's always listening to us, well, if we wanted to, and can give us advice, can help us think through and do things smarter. Now, will everybody utilize AGI technology to their own personal growth? I hope so, but there's no guarantee. I mean, if people don't have to work, a lot of people just become addicts of some sort. But again, hopefully our AGI, our personal assistant, will help us find that path of having meaning and motivation in our lives.
Yes, indeed. And Ellen Crowley writes, maybe we need AI tutors like Socrates tutored Alexander. And indeed, our U.S. Transhumanist Party presidential candidate Tom Ross advocates as one of his proposals the widespread deployment of AI tutors for students and for the rest of us as well, which can be truly beneficial. But also, some comments in the chat pointed out an observation that I have had already. Jason Geringer writes, remember when the internet was new and we thought that now that the world has access to all of mankind's information, that people were going to be smarter, and that sure didn't happen. I was thinking in the mid-2000s that the ready availability of information, both historical and current, online, essentially for free, would create a new age of enlightenment, except now for the masses, not just for a segment of society. And for some reason that didn't happen. Now, Art Ramon, perhaps in a tongue-in-cheek way, says cat videos were the downfall. I don't think cat videos actually hurt that new enlightenment project very much. My view is an occasional cute distraction is not the problem. The problem is when people get stuck in algorithmically generated filter bubbles or self-selecting filter bubbles, and they no longer access the truth, even though the truth is there for them to access. Instead, they access whatever the latest source of propaganda feeds them, reinforcing their own deleterious emotional tendencies. But what is your thinking about why technology thus far doesn't seem to have made humans smarter, or has it made humans smarter, but we just have higher standards now?
We probably take a lot of things for granted in terms of, if you start a company and how many things have become so much easier. You can look them up on the internet. Now you can get ChatGPT or large language models to help you write code. And I mean, it has its own problems, but clearly there are a lot of tools that we have. Translation, summarization, and so on. It just, if the educational system, if the core education doesn't really teach you how to think properly, the majority of people, then it takes these rare individuals who are self-starters who utilize these tools to their advantage. And, we're seeing in a lot of startups, young kids that don't have, rich parents or anything, that can just get going quickly by utilizing the technology. But it does require the individual to take that initiative. And unfortunately, I think our school system does not encourage that.
Yes, indeed. Our school system definitely is not suited toward individualized learning or critical thinking or any sort of initiative that departs from essentially a few prescribed paths that students are channeled along. And by the way, John H. points out it was actually Aristotle who tutored Alexander. That is correct. And in reference to the Dune series, Art Ramon writes, we need mentat schools. So we need schools for the kinds of people who would be effective tutors. Now, we have about 5 minutes remaining in our virtual enlightenment salon, and there are so many questions that we could delve into. I will ask one more question from the audience, and then I will ask you for your concluding remarks, Peter. Alan is wondering, how does the integration of quantum computing influence the development of AGI or ASI, which would be artificial superintelligence? Now, Serendipity's Muse writes, quantum computing right now is a very limited applicability. It is not general purpose. Do you think quantum computing will play a role in the approach that you have in mind, or maybe other possible approaches toward AGI?
Extremely unlikely. I mean, quantum computers, I think some of the quantum supremacy claims have actually been debunked now. So it's not even clear whether quantum computers can do anything better than conventional computers right now. But certainly nobody that I'm aware of is claiming that quantum computers can be general purpose computers. I don't think they're going to be here anytime soon. I don't see how they're going to help achieve AGI on my timeline. They're really good for optimizing. If they work, once they get them to work, they're good for optimizing particular problems, well-defined problems. That's not really a core requirement of AGI. It's quite the opposite, that AGI will help us create quantum computers in the same way that AGI will help us create nanotechnology. Earlier on we were talking about how, Kurzweil has, this growth that's just going to happen somehow, or just happens. And, some of that certainly has been true in terms of computing power. But when I came to America in '95, I met up with, Foresight Institute and a lot of, Max Moore and extropians. And I was like a kid in a candy store with, all of the talk about life extension, cryonics, nanotechnology, and AI, and so on. That's almost 30 years ago. Nanotechnology has pretty much come to a standstill, certainly relative to what we expected. So it's not inevitable that things go forward, but AGI will enable so many of these technologies that we just haven't had enough human brain power to pursue, or not well enough.
Yes, indeed. And David has a 60-second recommendation on learning more about routes to AGI. So please proceed, and then we'll have brief closing comments from Peter.
Well, this has been a really worthwhile conversation, and Peter's right to point out all the things that AGI will allow us to do, which we have not been able to do yet. And Peter's also done a great service in showing us that there's more to reaching AGI than you might think of if you're just focusing all the time on generative AI. This question of how might we get to AGI is actually the subject of a conference in Seattle from the 13th to the 16th of August. But you don't need to go all the way to Seattle to watch it. You can register and watch it online. It's run by Ben Gutzel, who, along with Peter, is one of the co-founders of the idea of AGI. And Ben is also talking about a combination of neurological or neurosymbolic AI, though he has different ways of getting there. And what's really interesting about this conference is there's about a dozen people who are going to give a dozen different thoughts on how we might get to AGI. And that, I think, will be a useful workout. Because if we are thinking about the impact of AGI, the moral implications, the political implications, we also need to understand how might it actually arrive? What would it involve? Because some of the moral and philosophical arguments depend upon technical assumptions which probably aren't true. So that is well worth getting your heads around. So look up AGI Conf 2024. You'll find details of that. And there's a preview of it on Wednesday. So if you also look up on the Singularity Net website, you'll see collaborative governance for a beneficial future. with a number of the speakers from the AGI conference.
Yes, thank you, David. And I've shared the link below. And now, Peter, in 1 minute, how would you like to conclude our salon today?
Yeah, just to respond to the AGI conference, I must say I'm actually personally very disappointed that there isn't a workshop. I actually asked to have a workshop to seriously discuss technical issues like the ones I mentioned today. What really is a realistic path? Who has a path to AGI? And can we, like adults, talk about how realistic or what we can learn from each other? And there wasn't any interest in including that. So I'm actually quite disappointed in that missed opportunity to seriously discuss what the most direct path, or even a viable path to AGI is. And from so far, from what I've seen with the speakers there, I don't believe there are going to be very many concrete proposals on how to get to AGI.
Interesting.
But that,
Yes.
that's my perspective on that.
Well, I do hope that today we have been able to discuss just that, the path to AGI. Unfortunately, we're out of time for our salon, but I'm sure we will continue this conversation in various venues. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today, and I hope that we can all live long and prosper.